Okay, hello everybody. It doesn't look like we've got any students here at the moment, so I think we'll maybe give it another maybe 30 seconds or so just to see if people show up. If not, we'll just go ahead and start the recording, and we will we'll send this recording to you after the session is over. All right. All right. So for today's class, we're going to talk about something that's fairly specific. Something called inference questions. And we're going to look at this from the perspective of both the GRE and the GMAT. All right. Inference questions they'll show up in a couple of different spots. And before we actually get to that, let's talk about what an inference actually is. All right. When you're inferring something, when you're inferring information, you're basically, you're drawing an inference, you're drawing information from what may not be stated expressly. All right. That's what the title of this session is called, Interpreting the Unsaid. For example, if I said, well, okay, let's say let's say you woke up in the morning, you walked outside and you saw that the ground was soaking wet. You could probably likely draw an inference that it rained last night, right? A reasonable inference to draw would be that it rained. Now, it's possible that other inferences could be drawn, right? Maybe someone came on the lawn and and sprayed it with a hose or something like that, right? But the reasonable assumption, even though it's not specifically said, that you could draw from what your observations are of the situation around you is that since we see observation Y, X must have happened. All right. So let's kind of jot that down for kind of basic basic inferential premise here. All right. So since we observe, let's call it B, A must have happened. All right. And this kind of logical thinking is really the basis of any inference question on both the GRE and the GMAT. Now, they're going to be presented in somewhat different ways. All right. So let's kind of outline those to start out. On the GMAT, these are usually going to show up in one particular place. Critical reasoning. All right. Now, for the GMAT critical reasoning, you'll have, depending on what the breakdown is, maybe 7 or 8 different types of critical reasoning questions. And again, remember that the critical reasoning ones, these are the ones with the short logical passages. There'll be a short paragraph, a few sentences, something like that, and you are going to be asked to either, determine assumptions or figure out what might strengthen or weaken or identify a flaw or resolve a paradox. But one of these categories is what can be inferred, draw an inference. Okay. That is where things are going to show up on the, that's how inference questions are going to show up on the GMAT. On the GRE, they can actually show up in a couple different spots. Actually on the GMAT as well, but let's say on the GRE, you're going to usually see these in a couple of spots. They might show up in a short passage reading comprehension, short or long passage reading comprehension, because you don't really have a kind of a specific critical reasoning section on the GRE that you do on the GMAT. It's kind of more grouped into the reading comp. All right. Now, when you see this kind of thing in a short passage reading comprehension question, it's really going to be about the logical inference. All right. It's like, you're looking at a premise. Can you kind of, can you determine what the what the premise of a particular argument is? What can you infer from a particular argument? When you're dealing with longer kind of reading comprehension passages, it's going to be more about inference in context. All right. Which means that you may want to read a little bit above and a little bit below where the potential inference actually shows up. All right. Let's take a look at a couple of these. All right. Let's see. The first one I'm going to grab is, we're going to start with a couple of GMAT ones. All right. So 1 second here. Okay, now before we start this, for GMAT critical reasoning type of questions, whether it's inference or any other type, generally what I recommend is to break down to whatever extent possible. And we had another class on this, but to break down the stated premise, right, the stated passage into kind of as few sentences as possible, or critical reasoning inference questions. Try to restate the passage in as few words as possible. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pause the recording for a bit while everybody takes a look. Actually, no, I think I'll let it go. I'll let it go just to kind of give everyone time. So take a look here. I should read this through. I'll give you guys maybe 45 seconds, something like that. I should cite the source here. This is from Princeton Review. Okay, a few more seconds. Okay, let's take a look here. Now, sometimes you'll find that that the term inference is used directly. It's not actually used. It's not actually used here. Best supported, but that's kind of a clue that you're looking for an inference. So the first step is to break it down. Okay, so what do we have here? Let's take a look. 1 second. Okay, so we can, all right, let's break it down a little bit. We can induce viewers to project feelings. Okay. Onto screen characters. Okay. Okay, now we have a study. Okay, what does the study say? Okay, let's see here. Okay, study. Woman's face preceded by image of a baby. All right. Okay. Audience. What did the audience see? Contentment. Okay. So you see what we're doing here. We're like, we're taking we're just kind of like, stripping it down a little bit just to make it a little bit easier to go and distill what they're actually getting at. Okay. Okay, now the same woman, but with shark, audience sees fear. Okay. Okay, and then we got the conclusion here. All right, so okay, so then it says, all right, news teams must be cautious. All right, that is basically kind of a restating of of everything there. It's like, so they're saying, okay, well, we've shown an image of a baby, the audience sees contentment. We show an image of a shark, the audience sees fear. Okay, fine. That seems pretty straightforward. Now they're saying, they're asking us to draw an inference. What is best supported here? All right, so let's take a look at the answers. Well, let's see here. A couple things you want to be careful of here. You want to be careful of things that are irrelevant. You want to be careful of things that are unsupported. 1 second. careful, not irrelevant, out of scope, unsupported, or overly editorialized answers. All right. We're not looking for opinions here. We're looking for, we're looking for something inferential. We're looking for what can be deduced. All right. So what do we have here? Let's take a look at all of them. Well, okay. So the first one is, okay, TV news teams have abused their position of trust in the past. That could be true. It's possible, from what we know about TV news, okay, yes, some of them may have abused their trust. But is that what's actually going on here? Is that what's being, pointed to directly? No, it's out of scope. All right, we're drawing a conclusion that is not really, although we might bring in outside knowledge, which you shouldn't do for these kinds of questions, we're not really, saying anything directly. All right, rule that out. Okay, number two, the expression on the woman's face was in actuality blank. Well, it doesn't actually tell us that, right? We don't know what the expression looked like, and on top of that, you can't really have a fully blank expression anyway, all right? That's a misdirection out of scope, all right? What about C? Images of a baby engendered feelings of happiness in the audience. All right. Well, that looks like a possibility, right? It doesn't actually say that directly, right? It doesn't say here that, the baby itself, engendered feelings of happiness, but you can sort of draw that link because when they, first they showed the image of the baby, right? Then something happened, and then the audience has a perception of the woman's face. So it seems reasonable that that could be what happened. Okay. D, audiences should strive to be less gullible. Okay, sure, why not? I mean, it's, okay, it's great to to question everything and don't believe everything you see, but we're not making a whole big editorial statement here. That's not what they're asking. Out of scope. Rule it out. All right. And the last one, the technique for manipulating audiences described in the passage would also work in a radio program. Maybe, but they're not telling us. So we're talking about viewership, right? We're talking about the radio, right? We're talking about TV, out of scope, right? So the answer is going to be this one right here. Okay. Let's take a look at another one. Second. Okay. Here's one where you're going to work with Kaplan. This is another GMAT one, and then we're going to jump over to a GRE. Okay, you guys take your time with this one. Hello, hi Ronley. So I'm just having everybody read one of these inference questions, probably for another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, this one's pretty short. All right, so this one doesn't have like a whole bunch of additional wording, right? This is a basic, single sentence logical premise. So you don't really need to break down all that much. But what's Randall here saying? Okay, many. That's kind of a keyword. Many, not all. Many. All right. Other productions of my plays by amateur theater groups are poorly done. Okay. And such interpretations. Remember that word "such" is important. That refers to these. Do not provide a true measure of my skills as a dramatist. Many of the productions of my plays are by amateur theater groups, poorly done, and such interpretations do not provide a true measure of my skills as a dramatist. Okay. What inference fits? All right. So here you want to you want to kind of take a look at the logical trajectory. All right. And be aware of your terms like many, all, none, some. Right. Okay. So many is just it may not be all of them. Right. So if many of the productions of the plays by amateur theater groups are poorly done, there may be some that are not poorly done. Right. But the ones that are poorly done do not provide a true measure of the skills of as a dramatist. Okay. Okay. So what do we have here? Okay, for A, some amateur theater group productions of random plays provide a true measure of his skills as a dramatist. If you're not thinking about this, if you're thinking about this too quickly, you might say, "Oh yeah, well, that's kind of the opposite there." But it doesn't really say that. We cannot necessarily infer just because he's talking about many are poorly done. He's not saying anything about the others. We cannot draw that inference from this. So rule out A. All right. It looks like at first glance that you might be able to jump to that conclusion, but it doesn't really follow. Okay. B, all amateur theater group productions that are not poorly done provide a true measure of his skills as a dramatist. Well, for the same reason, that's we're not talking about the ones that are not poorly done, right? But we're talking about two different things. We're talking about how well they're actually done, and we're talking about his skills as a dramatist. But again, we cannot draw that conclusion directly. We can't draw that inference directly. All right, rule out B. Okay. C, all of the productions of Randall's plays by amateur theater groups that do not provide a true measure of his skills are poorly done. That is way out of scope, way too broad. It's certainly not saying anything about all of them, every single one. All right, we can't jump to that broad-based conclusion. So rule out C. All right. D, if a production of a dramatist play is well done, that it provides a true measure of his or her skills as a dramatist. That is too broad because now we're going out of scope. It probably wouldn't even be true for Randall, but now we're talking about artists in general. So that's way too broad, way out of scope. All right. Okay, then E. Okay, at least some amateur theatrical groups' productions of Randall's plays fail to provide a true measure of his skills as a dramatist. Well, yeah, I mean he's saying that flat out, right? So the many, that's certainly capturing at least some, right? Um, so E is basically a direct inference from what is being said there. So E would be the right answer. Okay. Okay, so those are a couple of the inference questions from the GMAT. Now we're going to do the GRE, and this is going to be a bit longer because we're actually going to incorporate a longish reading passage. All right, so I'm going to copy that in. Give me a second here. This could be a good bit of reading here, so give me a minute. There is more. And there's even more, but not too much more. Okay, this is how inference questions may show up in the GRE. All right, they may show up as part of, reasonably longish reading passages. Make sure it all matches up. I think this is okay. Okay, so I am going to give whoever's watching you should probably give yourself, this passage has 3 questions associated with it. We're only going to look at one. We're only going to look at the inference one. But in general, you'd probably give yourself 6 minutes to do the passage and the questions. So I would say give yourself maybe let's say 3.5 to 4 minutes to read the passage. All right, so I'm just going to pause the timer here and have you go and read the whole thing. Make it a little bit bigger so that you can see. And if you need me to scroll a little bit, or if you're having trouble seeing, just let me know. Okay, I think I'll give it another maybe another minute. Okay. All right. Now we have had in previous sessions a number of classes that kind of focused on different aspects of reading comprehension. All right. So, we talked about kind of global versus local questions. We've talked about kind of how to break them down, how to do passage mapping, how to survey things. So I'm not going to go and rehash all of those. But keep in mind that when you do want to be aware as you're answering a reading comp question. Whether it's an inference one or not, what kind of question it is, what the scope is going to be, right? Inference questions are generally going to be local in scope, right, rather than global. They're not going to be usually not going to be referring to the passage as a whole. They're going to ask you to, look in a certain particular location. All right. So let's go and take a look at the question that they're going to be asking here. 1 second. Okay, so the inference question that is going to be asked. is going to be this. Okay, now they're not always going to give you line numbers. When they give you line numbers, it helps, right? Because it's going to kind of help you narrow down where to go. But that doesn't mean that you should look entirely at those line numbers, right? 53 and 54 here, but you want to read in context, right? You want to read for GRE, for GRE questions, GRE inference questions, you probably want to read maybe a few lines above, a few lines below to kind of see what's going on. It's like, well, okay, artificial distinction, what are they referring to? Well, let's see. Hold on one second, watch about this going off. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's see here. 53 54, artificial distinction between the public and private spheres. Okay. Okay, so what are we actually referring to? All right, so now you want to read a little bit above. All right, so there's some sort of artificial distinction. Okay, what do we know about what Ben, the author in question, is talking about, and Carnell, the person who is writing about this author? All right, well, let's see. Okay, Ben's choice of literary form underscores the differences between her own approach to crafting a tragic story and that taken in the dramatic tragedies. Okay, well, that suggests that there's a difference between the way in which Ben views tragedy, right, and the way in which everybody else, kind of the main, like the authors at the time, people who were writing public tragedies at the time viewed it, right? Because Ben is taking a different point of view. So you want to kind of incorporate that kind of context as you are drawing your inference. All right. So okay, so maybe we should read a little bit above. It's like, well, okay, it actually kind of starts, here a little bit, right? You want to kind of, sometimes you can get away with reading just a line or two above, above or below. Sometimes you may want to read a little bit, beyond that, just to get a sense of kind of what is being questioned, right? So we've got Ben is questioning a prevailing view, and that's all going to come into play with the inference. All right. So let's take a look here. Okay. The artificial distinction. Is it A? Okay, practice utilized in dramatic tragedies of providing different structural models for the public and private spheres. Well, that's not really right, because the thing is they're not really focusing on the traditional models, or sorry, they're generally not dealing with the private sphere at all. All right, that's something that Ben is taking a look at. That's not really taking a look at kind of the conventional wisdom there. So rule out A. Okay. Um, B again, we're not really talking about the passive obedience to the, she's talking about passive obedience to the king, right? That's actually about the public sphere, not the private sphere. So you want to be careful not to, get caught up in the wording. All right. C, we're not drawing, they're trying to fool you here kind of with the concept of distinction, but the distinction being drawn here is not between novels and tragedies, or novels and drama. All right. That's a misdirection. D, okay, assumption made by the authors of conventional dramatic tragedies that legitimate tragic action occurs only in the public sphere. That is what's captured there, because the thing is, the conventional tragedies, they are talking about kind of this relationship between, kind of people with respect to, the king, royalty, right, the public political ideal. So that actually does fit. All right, and then E, we're not talking about gender-based differences here. It doesn't mean that it doesn't show up somewhere in the passage, but that's not what the focus is on. Now, keep in mind, again, that inference questions, this is a hard question. So the GRE reading comps, they can be tough. So you really want to make sure that you're taking a step back, that you are reading, the location of the passage that you're being asked about, but that you're putting it in context and taking a step back just to make sure that you're kind of, internalizing that context, because they're going to be giving you false, there's going to be a lot of false positives here, right? A lot of the incorrect answers are going to, potentially look right, but they're referring to something slightly different. All right. Okay, so that is essentially how you're going to be, dealing with inference questions on both the GRE and the GMAT. I am going to stick around if anyone happens to log in. I'll be around here for another probably 10 or 15 minutes. If anybody, if anyone happens to sign up late and has any questions, I will be here to answer them. All right. Good luck, and I will see you for the next session in 2 weeks. That will be about algebra. I think we'll be dealing with kind of difficult word problems, things like rate, time, distance, and work rate problems, things like that. All right. Have a good week.